Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Today we have another very interesting project that we'll be discussing, and this time we'll be doing clustering and segmentation for purposes of a marketing strategy, developing a marketing strategy. So this is a very lifelike scenario. Let's imagine your boss comes around and says, "Well, the marketing team would like to get some data analysis on the customers who come into the mall where we'll be conducting the study, and they would like to know how to target specific groups depending on their characteristics. Unfortunately enough, the data team has the data set ready for you, and we can use that to analyze. So we'll take it forward with a few. I think we'll just be using Python in this particular example. A bit of machine learning, a bit of explanatory data analysis, and some statistic measures. That's all. So with that, let's go ahead and get started and see what we're gonna do today. So within the scenario that we talked about earlier, now let's try to sort of divide that a little bit so we can engage it head on. So in this particular case, what's our problem statement? Um, well, the problem is that stakeholders would actually like to know how their target customers are grouped based on their different characteristics and their spending. So, who would be best for the marketing team to plan a strategy on that basis? So, basically, we're trying to identify the most important shopping groups who we can target. We have several measures, particularly income, age, and the mall shopping score. And of course, we also have the gender, which factors in a little bit, as we will see. So the question here becomes, what is the ideal number of groups and what should their labels be? What are their distinctive characteristics? What we're going to do then is we're going to do segmentation to divide these customers into groups that we can approach with different marketing strategies. We will create subsets of markets based on the behavioral criteria, particularly, and whatever of these variables that we have discussed that really makes the difference at the end. So, what will our process look like? In this particular case, we will start with a quick exploratory data analysis, followed by clustering of these variables together to group the that data that we have, and then to perform a few summary statistics to understand more what's going on within these groups. So usually we would head right now to the code and go through the process. However, I think it's more appropriate since there's a bit of noise around the code itself. I think it's better that we discuss the conclusions this time, how we transmit it or how we translate it to stakeholders, and then we go ahead and talk about the code for as much as we would like. So, about our conclusions, based on what we did, was at the end, we clustered groups together based on the annual income and the spending score in the graph on the left. We have found it best to have five groups based on these two variables. So, in this particular scenario, cluster zero, the ones in blue right here, are the group that both the high annual income and high spending groups. They are our MVPs. And what we can say about this group is that 54% of them are female. So if we are going to make a marketing strategy campaign, it should be focused towards this group and target feminine products which are popular with this particular category. And the rather surprising thing is cluster number three, which is the red group right over here on the top left of the graph. This group actually has high spending scores despite having relatively low income. Of course, we would not be able to particularly figure out a marketing strategy based on the data that we have, but in general, and on speculation via experience, you can tell that it can possibly be attributed to spending on big ticket items. So, with which a yearly sales marketing campaign would make a huge difference to attract this customer base. However, as we said, we need to dive into the purchases of this particular group based on their IDs, for instance, to see if that is indeed true. So, what are the spending habits based on the goods that they actually buy? And then we have cluster number two, the green one over here, which is rather intriguing. So this particular cluster is we have a missed opportunity there. They have a high income, but they do not have high spending score. So the cluster is 53% males, and they are averaging 41 years old. Um, but we do not really, as you can note, first and foremost, is they're a little bit dispersed over there where their spending score is, and their annual income as well. We seem to have a couple of outliers, or at least one um, of them. So it's rather difficult to really make the conclusion on how to target the specific group. It requires further also analysis to understand their spending habits. When do these people spend? What do they buy? How can we target them? So we don't want to keep missing this opportunity. So, and on that, let's go through our code. Let's go through how we got to these results and why we chose to present the annual income and the spending score rather than including other factors like age. So here we go. This is our Jupyter notebook where we have coded in with Python. So we start off by importing the different libraries that we're going to use, including Seaborn and Matplotlib, because these are the ones that we'll be using to visualize. We import our or read into our data that we have, and then we take a look at the head just to understand like the different columns that we have, get a general idea of how data is entered. And then we start with some measures of central tendencies. We can look at the mean. Of course, the customer ID is really not representative of anything that relates to center of tendencies. This is just the ID that we're giving the entries or the customers. We can look at the age, however, and the annual income and the spending score. Um, if you look at the mean and the median, for all cases, you can tell it's going to be a little bit, at least, normally distributed. So let's take a look. Let's plot these different variables and see how they are distributed. And it gives a rough idea of what to expect, when you're going to look at the data, particularly in this spot where you have a bit of a fat tail. So that might imply some outlier here yet to come. Let's move on. Yeah, and onto that, we also try to differentiate between the distribution using the density and the gender hue to basically differentiate between male and female here. And we see that females are, well, they are less widely distributed than the males. On the age front, it's particularly very similar on the annual income, although there is, as we said, the outlier lies within the male category. We can probably tell that. And then here that the spending scores of females is a bit more normally distributed than the males, which is rather exciting to see. Another way to look at it is via the box plots. So taking a look at the box plots, we can see that, for instance, the ages of the third quartile over here is a little bit more dispersed. They are more concentrated between 35, 36, 37, something like that. And then beyond that, they're a bit more dispersed up to a maximum of 70 or around 70, excuse me. And then the annual income, we take a look and we do detect an outlier here at least, as we had sort of seen from the distribution already. We can do the exact same thing for differentiation also by gender, and we can see the males and females and how they are distributed on the age, annual income, and spending score. So for the spending score, it's interesting that the second quartile of males is more dispersed over here in the spending score, compared to the females, which are concentrated a little bit beyond that. And the females, on the other hand, the third quartile is a little bit more widely distributed compared to the males. So this gives us a good idea of how data looks, generally looks, and it is useful to give you some insights. But again, this is a good idea, but we need to dig deeper if you want to find some more reliable result. We also know that the females are 56% of the entire sample, so that is something to keep in mind. So we can go into bivariate analysis, and you'll notice that I zoomed out a little bit, but that is just so we can see all the dimensions. Um, so what grabs the interest here, first and foremost, is the relationship between the annual income and the spending score, right? So we can kind of see here a hint of a cluster over here. So that is the one thing that might be most interesting. Let's take a look at the age and the spending score. So we have here something like this, let's say. We have that if we're going to make some deduction about this particular shape, we might say that the relationship, if we try to sort of fit a line over there, it would say that the correlation is a little bit negative in nature, where as age increase, the spending score decreases. We can also do the same with with of course gender, as we did before, just to get differentiation between them. I don't particularly detect any um, differences in the gender distribution, so we can have this as sort of in the back of our heads. And then we can get the mean group by gender. The mean of females is 38. The mean annual income is 59. The mean spending score for females is a little bit higher than males, 51 to 48. And we can also keep this information in the back of our heads. Here it starts to get a little bit interesting, where we explore the correlation between between these different variables. And indeed, the rather significant relationship is having the age relationship with the spending score, which is negative 0.33, more or less. So indeed, it's a weak adverse relationship, where when age increases, spending score tends to decrease. All right. And okay, so we did our EDA. We would like to now move on to the clustering analysis and see how we can group these different customers into clusters and make certain conclusions. So moving on, we'll head straight into the bivariate clustering, where as we had like seen through the exploratory data analysis, the most interesting relationship lies between the annual income and the spending score. So we'll try to cluster our group on that basis. We'll be using the k-means for clustering, but the first step, of course, is to finding out the optimal number of clusters. In this case, we'll be using something called the elbow method, and it is not necessarily the best method, but there is no reason to go more complicated than that, especially since the number of cluster using the elbow method would be 5, which seems reasonable based on our EDA here, where we can kind of see a hint of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different clusters. So we'll proceed with that, and we will fit our data frame and then graph this relationship and graph the different clusters here. We had already drawn the conclusions, that the 0 is our MVPs. We have the 3s who are big budget item spenders. And we have the number 2 who is a bit more of a missed opportunity, or we need to understand more of their spending habits in order to attract them, make them join up with our group number 0 over here. So another good thing to do is once we've done this clustering is to actually do some, statistical analysis. Very simple, really. For instance, in this particular case, we're taking the mean. We just want to see the age mean of, for instance, 0. There's 32. The annual income is ranges from, averages 86,000 per year, and their spending score is high, averaging 82. And then we can also take a look at the female. It's interesting that here the females are a high percentage. And also in group number 3, we can say that 60% of group number 3 who are big spenders on particular ticket items, 60% of them almost is females, or 59%. So we draw these conclusions, rather interesting, and we take them to the stakeholders and present them. Why did I pick that though, instead of going with the multivariate clustering? The answer is it's a little bit more complicated and does not provide as much of valuable insights. So you can include something like that in the annex, but I don't think it's necessary to include in the bivariate clustering, in the presentation. So for multivariate clustering, we just do the same thing. We want to find out how many clusters are appropriate in this particular scenario. So we try to fit in, and we need to detect the number of appropriate clusters. In this particular scenario, the elbow looks to be at the 4. So we're going to cluster four different groups, fit in, and then we see the distribution based on the age, income, and spending cluster, taking into consideration these 3 different factors. And then we try to plot this relationship. This is what I mean by it gets a little bit more complicated. So here we can see, let's take a look at the spending score legend first. The bigger the circle is, the higher the spending score is. In this particular case, group 0 is our biggest spenders. If we can just, kind of by eyeballing it, we see these different big circles. So they have a high annual income. The ages up to 40, between like 25, let's say, and 40, and they are our MVPs right here. However, on group 3 are also big spenders. for us. The red dots are big spenders for us. They have a bit of a lower annual income, which is rather conceivable, seeing as how they are also of younger age, starting from less than 20 up to 35. There's a bit of common ground between group 0 and group number 3 here. But they are both big spenders, but the bigger spenders is 0. So and now we can take a look at the green dots, which is group number 2. It's a little bit over the map. The ages are bigger, the spending is moderate, and the annual income is rather in the lower front and the lower form. So, as I was saying, I think these groups, the blue group and the red group, sort of highlights the same groups that we were discussing before, using only annual income as the main measure compared to spending. In this particular case, what I would do is I do not want to make things too complicated in presentation. So I take the annual income, I take the spending score, and I put it there. And then, if needed, I bring in the age, I bring in the gender as needed. If I see something that is relatively important there based on the follow-up statistical analysis. And then we do the same for the multivariate here, based on both the gender and the age, annual income and spending score. And of course, if the stakeholders would like to dig deeper, then we need to collect more data and understand more about, what consumer group spends on what goods, so that we are able to target maybe a bit more of our marketing strategy, not just towards the consumers, but also towards the products that they are more likely to buy. So based on our analysis, here are our conclusions, which we've already talked about at the near the start of this video. So we're not gonna be reiterating them. There's no need particularly. But please feel free to pause and take a look again at the paragraphs, how to sort of translate these conclusions to the stakeholders or the marketing strategy team. And then, well, thank you very much if you've been watching so far. I hope this has been useful to you, to sort of understand, maybe get an idea of how we use the K-means learning process to segment and cluster, and how our insights of annual income and its relationship with the spending score led us to focusing or narrowing down, zooming in on these two particular variables. As always, you're welcome to find this presentation and more on my YouTube channel. And also, please feel free to go to my website and check some of my other work. And once again, thank you for joining me today. And as always, happy analyzing.